Hey, this is Melissa from Love Notes from God and Catch the Buzz. My grandpa, President Russell M. Nelson, the prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, recently passed away. Now, some of you might be feeling a little bit confused knowing me that you were unaware that he is my grandpa. Well, I haven't always been his granddaughter. Let me explain. In 2019, President Nelson gave a talk to the Relief Society, the General Relief Society meeting called Spiritual Treasures.
One is about the prophet Joseph Smith, the prophet of this dispensation. My love and admiration for him grows with every passing day. And the second thought occurred as I looked at my wife, my daughters, granddaughters, great-granddaughters. I felt like I'd like to claim every one of you as part of my family. So if you're looking for an extra grandpa, give me a call.
So that little piece of information is only something that you know, where he extends to invite everyone to be his granddaughter if you are watching the video because of the talk, because it is not in the written one that is put in the church magazine. So what happened for me is my last grandparent had just passed away, my grandpa, Jervis Bell. And my grandparents, my first grandparent to pass away was when I was only 8 years old. Lewis Gordon Roundy, descendant of Shadrach Roundy, and through Lorenzo Roundy and his wife Priscilla, his second wife. So had a very long time without that grandpa. And interesting thing about him is he was engaged to my grandma before they had even met. They had been writing to each other, and her father had passed away when she was 16. And of course, this is my grandma Roundy. I'll jump onto hers. When she was 16, her daddy passed away. And so her mother was in Utah, left to help to provide for the family. She moved to Utah to be able to gain employment to provide for them. And so my grandmother became the mother, caring for all her siblings, which I didn't really understand at the time when, when it would be my grandma's birthday. She would have all of her siblings would come, and I thought, well, that's really nice of them. That's quite an ordeal for them to do just for my grandma's birthday. But what I didn't realize is that the reality that some of them probably knew my grandmother more as their mother than as a sister, because their mother was gone. And she is actually a cousin to Howard W. Hunter, who is a prophet of the church for 9 months. He dedicated the Jerusalem Center in Israel, BYU Jerusalem Center. And this is a picture that I love of how I remember her. And she passed away at the age of 96. And then my next grandparents that passed away, and she passed away just a couple days after Thanksgiving, which was a really hard time to be eating Thanksgiving dinner in one room, and the room next to us, we were waiting for my grandma to pass. And then, surprisingly, 6 months later, my grandfather, Jervis Bell, had not been doing well. And of course, my grandmother, Elizabeth Freckleton Bell, had been doing all that she could and exhausting herself to care for him. And she ended up passing away. But I I was grateful to have known in advance there was a medication that she was on that she was not going to be able to continue taking anymore. And so we knew it was just a matter of time before she would pass. And so with that, I was able to drive over to the hospital and know and think of the last things I would want to say to her before she passed. And one of the things I said to her was, Grandma, you lived you did right, and you helped us to know what was right and to help us to know the gospel and to know who our Savior Jesus Christ was. And she said, well, then I guess I've done something good after all. I was grateful to be able to provide her with some peace and feeling like she had done good. My grandpa, Jervis, he then passed away several years later, just before the 2019 General Conference. And so when President Nelson, and of course this is my grandma Elizabeth Bell here, when he stood up and said, does anybody, the way I remember it, does anybody need a spare grandpa? That's what he said. And at that moment, I wanted to throw my hand up in the air and say, me, I do. Because it was a sad realization for me that I had no more living grandparents. I'd even had great-grandparents in my life that I had known. And so it was a harsh reality to feel like nobody was left. And at that moment, I had known that President Russell M. Nelson was a prophet of God and spoke for the Lord. At that moment, I knew that the Lord saw me, and he had spoken to me through his prophet, President Russell M. Nelson. And I'm so grateful to have a prophet, and I have a testimony that this is the restored Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that Joseph Smith was indeed a prophet of God, and he restored the Lord's church upon the earth through the Book of Mormon and through the restored authority of the priesthood from the Lord. And every prophet following him is indeed a prophet of God to speak through the Lord and for the Lord and all of his apostles. And I'm so grateful for the knowledge I have that I know the church is true, that prophets and apostles really do speak to us today. And I have a testimony of the temple, and that it really does allow an opportunity for families to be together forever. So I would love to hear anything that you have to share of a testimony that you have, things that you've learned from our prophet, President Nelson. And I know for me, it wasn't really real, his passing, until I saw his casket passing. Then it was the realization that he was really gone from mortality at this time. But I'm grateful for the knowledge of eternal families, and that we can be together again and live forever eternally with our families. And thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe to both channels, and look for more to come on Love Notes from God, sharing about the restored Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and on Catch the Buzz, learning about different faith-based medias and ways that we see God in our everyday life. We'll talk to you later. Thanks so much. Bye.